Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. So, it is just a couple days out. Oh, I didn't introduce myself. I'm your host, Jason Eck, and in just a couple of days, I am going to be reaching a milestone. And I have to admit, despite having, tried to focus on fitness and exercise, which I have been doing, I don't know if it's a combination of stress, maybe poor diet, maybe it's this nagging feeling that I'm about to turn 50. I don't know what it is, but I'm not feeling so great this week. And, birthdays are kind of a funny thing after you get a certain age, right? I think that, you turn 16, it's kind of exciting and you can drive. And then 17 is just kind of 17 and 18. Oh, I'm grown. And then you got 21 and then, maybe 25. And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to turn 30 and 35 doesn't matter. And 40 is kind of like 40 and then 50. I just don't know. I don't know where my head's at this week. And I'm not sure how I'm feeling, but I don't feel 100% great. And I have mentioned before that I do have Crohn's disease and, the insurance company made me change my medication. And there's that whole, I'm not sure if it's doing everything that it should, but there's all these other stressors and all this other stuff going on. And then I remember about 6 months ago, when I had my last visit with my gastroenterologist, and okay, well, we're not opening up the booking window yet, but you're due in 6 months. So that'll be, sometime in June. Do you know that this crazy lady who works in the office, and she's great, don't get me wrong, books my appointment on my birthday at 7:30 a.m. Come on, man. Why you got to do that? Yeah. So anyway, I'm not sure if I'm going to go very long because I'm just not feeling great and I might just need to call it and just go to bed early, which would be nice because I haven't been doing that enough either. So rest is another key component of fitness. So what's tonight's topic all about? Well, I'll tell you. There's been a lot of talk about a movie that did come out in the movie theater. My oldest son went and saw it with his buddies, and it is now, I guess, available for home release. And that is Godzilla -1. And what I find so interesting is there's a lot of talk on the interwebs about the English dub versus the original. Now, I will admit, and we'll kind of get to maybe the reasons why, but I do enjoy some anime. And what I have found is I would rather watch some anime with subtitles because you get the original voice acting. And I do think there's something more authentic and real about an anime that's done in the original Japanese voices and the emotions and how they're actually portraying the characters. So, for example, yes, I will admit some of you are going to be like, I'm turning this off. I'm not talking about anime tonight, so just relax. But be like, what? Anime? Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is, at least in the early few series, is very well acted. There's a lot of comedy, and even some of the early stuff is very sexually suggestive. So for anyone thinks it's just cartoons for kids, it was in the Americanized versions, not in the original Japanese versions. And I can't watch the American dubs. It doesn't sound authentic to me. Now, people in the United States who only grew up watching the American dubs swear by it. And the actor who portrayed Goku in the U.S. dub recently passed away, and there's a lot of people very moved by this. And, I get it. I do. That's what you came up with. Admittedly, I kind of came on to anime later in life, somewhere in my late 30s, early 40s. And I don't know, I just ended up falling in love with the storytelling. But English dubs and movies, well, I started going down this little rabbit hole as I do. And it brought me back to UHF Television. And that's really what this episode is about. UHF Television, and then later on into early cable television. So UHF, what exactly does that stand for? So I believe, is that ultra high frequency? Let's see. UHF. Let's get the exact definition of this. So ultra high frequency is the ITU designation for radio frequencies in the range between 300 megahertz and 3 gigahertz, also known as the decimeter band, as the wavelengths range from 1 meter to 1/10 of a meter. Okay. So for many of us growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had your VHF and your UHF. So basically your VHF is going to be the top part of your dial on a standard old school television. So it would be like 0 through 10 or maybe 0 through 9. And then the UHF channels would be like 10, 15, 20, 25, stuff like that. And growing up in the Northeast, particularly I grew up in Connecticut, but we did capture some of the signals from either New York or from Boston. And there's a couple channels in particular. So really how this all started in this, Godzilla -1 is thinking of two particular franchises, if you will, on the UHF dial. So the first one was known as the Creature Double Feature. Now, here in the Northeast, I know this was very popular in both Massachusetts as well as in Philadelphia with this nomenclature of Creature Double Feature. And I believe that it was Channel 56 up here in the Northeast. I'm pretty sure that's what we are capturing. However, I believe it was a different number on the dial at one point. Anyway, so the Creature Double Feature didn't have a host, but it was on in the afternoon. I believe typically it was on, let's just double check that. The Creature, I have so many tabs open because my brain is just going, hey, let's go down this rabbit hole. Hey, let's go down this rabbit hole. And I have, and even then I was trying to formulate everything down into a nice, concise way of doing it. And it really wasn't possible. So the Creature Double Feature is a television show syndicated in the Boston and Philadelphia area in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. It sometimes also aired under names like Sci-Fi Flicks and Creature Feature. The show aired classic monster movies. So we talk about classic monsters like Universal Horror, Hammer, American International Pictures, like Roger Corman stuff, but then also the giant studio monsters from Japan, the kaiju or tokusatsu. Okay. So this is where the Japanese element first kind of comes in, right? And dubs and those kind of things. But we're going to talk about the Chinese cinema as well. So anyway, beginning in 1972, a station in the Kaiser broadcasting chain, WKBG, Channel 56, now WLVI, started airing a collection of Godzilla movies once per week at about 4 p.m. on Saturday. Okay, it was the 4 o'clock movie. They cycled through their collection twice, noticing the broadcasts were especially popular with youngsters. Interesting. Then they started showing the films at midnight, calling it the Creature Feature. And the ratings become so popular that the show was moved till noon. It went from midnight to noon. Okay? Now, this is such a New England statement to make. So for those of you who don't know what this means, I'll try to give like the 30,000 foot explanation. However, it was in direct competition with WCVP TV's Candlepin Bowling and was moved to the 2 p.m. slot. It's one thing if you've watched pro bowling, but Candlepin Bowling is unique to the Northeast. Okay. It is a New England style bowling game, and it's played with a hand size ball. So imagine a skee ball, right? And the pins, instead of being what you typically think of as a bowling pin, round at the bottom and then it kind of tapers up, these are all tall and narrow pins that resemble a candle, and that's why they're called Candlepin. Very, very popular, particularly in the 70s and the 80s in New England. That's pretty much most of the bowling that I did as a kid up until my teens. It wasn't until my teens that I started going to like regular bowling alleys because we always went candlepin bowling. So, popularity of Creature Double Feature grew, it changed its start time to 1 p.m., and the show quickly became a staple of the station's Saturday programming schedule during the 70s and the 80s. Okay? So, although the exact date of the final show is currently unknown, it seems to have petered out sometime in 1983 and was replaced with MLVI TV's Martial Arts Theater. However, there was another channel that was also running something that we'll talk about, which is Kung Fu Theater. And I think it was on Channel 38, and this was over on Channel 56. So, that's the quick history of what it was. What was the Creature Double Feature? Now, unfortunately, this particular website didn't have a whole list of the features on the Creature Double Feature. So again, I mentioned that it's a combination of horror type creatures as well as the, kaiju, right? So the big creatures, the Godzillas, etc. Now, what's interesting is, and I'll kind of go through the list. So you had something like Battle Beyond the Sun, right? So what you notice with some of these is you have some very, very well-known, like, early credits for, like, directors or, re-edited versions, right? So, for example, this movie, Battle Beyond the Sun, which came out in 1959, had been re-edited, most likely for something like the Creature Double Feature, by Francis Ford Coppola. Right? So this is a Russian movie that's a sci-fi. Two countries race to have the first successful landing on Mars. Then you have something like Dracula versus Frankenstein. So this does in fact star Lon Chaney Jr., but that's out of 1971. Now, I don't remember this one, but it's Frankenstein versus Baragon. An American scientist and his Japanese colleagues study a mysterious feral boy who is seemingly resistant to radiation while a subterranean dinosaur ravages the Japanese countryside. Now, I don't really remember that one, but I do remember some of these movies. And the one that really came to mind ended up being, Rodan, for example. A mining engineer investigates the death of his colleagues, discovering prehistoric nymphs and a creature capable of flying and wreaking havoc at supersonic speeds. So I don't know if you remember Rodan, but Rodan was not really, I think it was meant to be somewhat like a pterosaur of some sort. But this is Ishiro Honda. There was an English version, and, this all kind of plays into the greater, like, Godzilla mythos, right? So you have a voyage to the prehistoric planet. I vaguely remember that one. Voyage to the planet of prehistoric women. Hey, once you got one, why not do the other? But Voyage to the Planet of Prehistoric Women, 1968, was directed by Peter Bogdanovich, starring Mamie Van Doren. Just absolutely crazy. But then the one that comes up over and over again, and it's so kind of curious because I don't think it stuck in my head, because you always think of Godzilla, and we can go through all the Godzilla movies, but there was Gamera. Now, Gamera was a giant turtle, a giant superpowered turtle that initially, like Godzilla, was just destroying Japan, but actually has a heart of gold, doesn't really hate humans, doesn't really hate, the countryside or the cities, and ends up becoming a protector of the people from other big bad monsters. So you have Gamera versus Baragon, 1966. You have, of course, Godzilla, 1954. This was played often, but also by Ishiro Honda. Godzilla versus Hedorah. Gamera versus Varus. Then you have like some of the Dracula movies, as my daughter goes to ask me to renew her permissions for certain apps. Hopefully my wife will get that. But you have Dogera, an amorphous cellular life form, descends from the atmosphere to consume carbon in the form of diamonds. The brain that wouldn't die. A doctor experimenting with a transplant technique keeps his girlfriend's head alive when she is decapitated in a car crash, then goes hunting for a new body. Let's see. Gamera versus Guron. Gamera versus Gaios. So, I mean, this is like 1967, 1968, 1969, like just churning out these films. X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes. So this came out in 1963. That's a Roger Corman film. But there is I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Now, this one I remember clearly being on the Creature Double Feature because of who it stars. Do you remember who stars in I Was a Teenage Werewolf? A very young Michael Landon. Yes, from Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie and Highway to Heaven. You know the guy. I Was a Teenage Werewolf. I must have seen that movie a million times. And that was directed by Gene Fowler, starring Michael Landon, Yvonne Lime, and Whit Bissell. Attack of the Puppet People rings a bell. This is directed by Burt Gordon. Lonely, deranged puppet master designs a machine that shrinks people. I know that I've seen that. Let's see. Cat People, have definitely seen that. That's from 1942. An American man marries a Serbian immigrant who fears she will turn into the cat person of her homeland's fables if they are intimate together. It is what it is. But there was one on here. Where did it go? That's right. So, The Terror. The Terror. So, a young French soldier cut off from his unit is beguiled by a mysterious woman whom he learns is the wife of the local baron, and that she seemingly died 20 years earlier. Starring Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson. Directed by Roger Corman. Now, why? So he got an assist, maybe a second unit director kind of thing, from Francis Ford Coppola. So Francis Ford Coppola came up under Roger Corman. Roger Corman was, I think, obviously a influence, but also a mentor to many, many young directors and filmmakers and actors as well. Nicholson claims to have nearly drowned while filming. That would not be good. We wouldn't have his career that came from it. Francis Ford Coppola is listed in the opening credits as associate producer Francis Coppola. Anyway, yeah, I think that's probably, and I probably wouldn't have known it, honestly, at the time. Probably my earliest, maybe not. Like I said, I saw a lot of weird shit when I was a kid. What would I have seen first with Jack Nicholson? I probably saw Cuckoo's Nest first, but no, it was probably this, honestly, because I probably saw it here on the Creature Double Feature. But yeah, I mean, there are so many of these. Like, it's a great list. Maybe I'll post it. This is a IMDb article in the Creature Double Feature. So they would go through a lot of these movies. And of course, anything that even remotely kind of hit, they would find something similar and they'd play it. But yeah, Gamera versus Jiger and Jiger Jr. Yeah, Attack of the Puppet People. I know I've seen that. Anything else here that is interesting? Mothra versus Godzilla, classic, seen it a bunch. Planet of the Vampires. Isle of the Dead, 1945, also Boris Karloff. So again, a lot of these were, you know, the Universals and the Hammers and all of those. Pretty much a huge selection from all over the place, and a bunch of stuff directed by Ishiro Honda and the kaiju movies from all of the different characters that he used. Oh, I knew this would be on here. So, King Kong did officially become part of that world, right? So Ishiro Honda did direct a movie called King Kong Escapes. The evil Doctor Who captures King Kong to dig for Element X when his robot duplicate, Mecha Kong, is unable to do the job, but Kong soon escapes and battles his doppelganger. I mean, come on. This is ridiculous, but also amazing at the same time. Like, I loved this stuff. And then, of course, you have King Kong versus Godzilla, also, directed by Ishiro Honda. A UN reporter covers the appearance of a prehistoric monster that emerges from hibernation while a pharmaceutical company seeks publicity with a monster of their own. Yeah. Then there's like Dracula, Prince of Darkness, of course, starring the legendary Christopher Lee in his whole series of Dracula movies, and those are the Hammer films. Oh, but I love Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. So stupid. An Okinawan prophecy appears to foretell Earth's destruction at the hands of Godzilla, only for the true Godzilla to reveal his doppelganger as a mechanical alien weapon. Good stuff. So, that was what was happening for the Creature Double Feature on Channel 56. A nice mixture of Japanese monster movies along with American horror style, quote unquote, monster movies. But then it mentions that there was the martial arts theater, but there was also what was called Kung Fu theater. And I think they were on different networks. I do believe that Channel 38 was the one that actually played, called it Kung Fu theater. So I started to go through the titles and I had this like flood of memories. Now, I couldn't find the exact film as far as a particular scene that was just in my head, and it has been for all these years. So anyone who's seen, and I wanted to go see it as soon as it was a trailer. This goes back to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, when that came out here in the States. And I said, I have to go see this movie because it had all of the wire work, which reminded me of all of these quote unquote kung fu or martial arts movies of the 70s and the 80s. Now, bonus points for Chow Yun-fat being the lead in that, as well as Michelle Yeoh, who are just legends of Chinese cinema. So I was just so taken with it because it was a style of film that was now done to the nth degree with high production values and strong performances. Not that these don't have some of that. Certainly they do. They don't necessarily hold up visually, although the stories and the concepts behind it, I think, do. Some very simple narrative sometimes, but I was so taken with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon because all that wire work, like I said. And you can also look at a series, I guess it's 2 films, of Kill Bill. Now, Kill Bill, Quentin Tarantino, was his homage to these movies. Now, whether it's George Lucas and Star Wars, who has always said that he was influenced by Asian cinema. Now, when I say Asian cinema, it's either Japanese or Chinese cinema in particular. So I believe Akira Tozawa was not Akira Tozawa, Seven Samurai, which I think is the one that's most frequently touted as being an influence on so many films. So Seven Samurai is Akira Kurosawa, an epic samurai action film that was that came out in 1954. Now, this has been Magnificent Seven, for example, was based upon this, and there have been elements in many other movies. But then on the Chinese side, you had a director. Well, I guess it's really a family, which are the Shaw brothers. So the Shaw brothers, you have, I'm going to mangle their names, so I apologize. So the 3 Shaw brothers, Runge, Runmei, and Runde, founded Tiani Film Company, which is unique, in Shanghai, and established a film distribution base in Singapore. where Rooney and their youngest brother, Run Run Shaw, managed the precursor to the parent company Shaw Organization. So this was established actually in 1925. 1925, they first started. Shaw Brothers was the largest film production company in Hong Kong, operating from 1925 to 2011. So their films were a huge influence on guys like Quentin Tarantino, who's not much older than us. I think he's just outside the range. I think he's a boomer. I think he's 1963, I think. He was watching stuff like this probably on the UHF channel, whatever equivalent would have out. I believe he's from California, and then working in the video store. So here's one of the things that you can see it in movies like Kill Bill. These were really gory. But what's interesting is I watched some clips tonight before I recorded. Now, if I was watching this stuff in the early 80s, anything before 84, I'm in single digits, right? So let's say I'm watching this at 7, 8, 9 years old. Now it doesn't look very believable. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, there's just blood and gore everywhere. And they always played it as though it were really happening and that it was really gruesome and really gory. But there was always these scenes, and this is how I kind of started this here. Scenes in my head about this wire work and guys who could seemingly fly through the air at their opponents, or they would fight each other in the air with these amazing weapons. And it wouldn't just be swords or sais or nunchucks or whatever it was. There was this one guy who had these like ninja claws. So imagine Wolverine, right? And he was the bad guy and he was just slicing people up. Well, here's where it all comes back to where I was talking about Tarantino. So Pai Mei is the trainer of the bride in the Kill Bill series. Now, Pai Mei is a fictional character in, I don't even know, maybe he wasn't like completely fictional. Pai Mei. So also known as Bak Mei, known as White Eyebrow, is said to have been one of the legendary 5 elders, survivors of the destruction of the Shaolin monastery by the Qing dynasty in 1644-1912, who, according to some accounts, betrayed Shaolin to the imperial government. He shares his name with the South Chinese martial art attributed to him. Bak Mei has been fictionalized in Hong Kong martial arts films. So, he was played by Gordon Liu in the Hollywood action film Kill Bill Volume 2, but he is also very well known for movies like Executioners from Shaolin, Abbot of Shaolin, and Clan of the White Lotus, 1977, 1979, and 1980, respectively. So here's the thing about Pai Mei. He was a badass. Now, one of the things that was always so evident was there was still this element, most of the time, that even the bad guy would have a certain sense of duty or honor, right? So it's like, hey, you can face me, but first you have to fight my guys. Not exactly fair, but hey, you gotta earn it before you mess with the big bad, right? And he would do that, and he'd say, okay. And he'd usually whip the good guy's ass, what it comes down to, and say, you're no good. And they would try to run away because he would then at this point, basically he would give them multiple warnings. Are you sure? You're not good enough. You really can't beat me. I'm going to tell you, you should stop. And it's always the overdub, so it sounds so cheesy. I don't know. I told you, you would never be able to beat me. I beat your master. Do you think you could avenge his death? I don't think you can. You don't have the skill. You don't have my tiger style, whatever. So anyway, I started going through the clips. And one of the things that popped out with all these different weapons, so we'll put Pai Mei to the side for a moment, is the movie series. So there's a director by the name of Chan Che, who's a Chinese filmmaker. And he had these series of movies through the Shaw Brothers, which was first it was the 5 Venoms, and then it was the 5 Elements Ninja, And I started looking through clips. I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I mean. And another filmmaker who was heavily influenced by this, and one of my favorite movies of all time, which probably should be no surprise, is Big Trouble in Little China and John Carpenter and his homage to these kind of characters, right? What did he call the big bad in Big Trouble in Little China? Lopan? I think it's Lopan, right? Who is very much an analog for, David Lopan. In many ways, a character just like Pai Mei, right? Not so far off. And you think about how, were they elementals that worked for him? Guy who looks like Raiden. All of that aesthetic, all of that style was very much directly from these movies. So Carter Wong as Thunder, yes, he is well known for Yang Zhen Ming Shaolin Men. 1977. That's one of the Shaolin films. Exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. So he was in them. That makes sense, since he looks exactly like one of the guys that I was watching tonight. And I'm like, gosh, he looks so familiar. James Pax as Lightning. He's an American-born actor who starred in, all USA films. Let me go back to Carter Wong, Eddie Lee, James Pack, Carter Wong, filmography. When Taekwondo Strikes. I love that. So he was in 18 Shaolin Disciples, Shaolin Kung Fu Mystagogue, The Good, the Bad, and the Loser, Shaolin Traitoress, Hero of the Eastern Skies, Shaolin Traitoress. That was through, interesting. So another thing that comes up quite a bit is that some of the Shaolin are eunuchs. So Pai Mei is in a fight, and this guy goes to grab him or punch him in the balls, and there's nothing there, and he just like winks at him like, haha, you can't beat me. So anyway, the Shaw Brothers films were all part of the Kung Fu theater, and just to kind of give you a brief list of like some of the films, because you might recognize some of them, particularly in the 70s. So you have The Killer, Sacred Knives of Vengeance, Finger of Doom, Five Fingers of Death, Man of Iron, Deadly Knives, also known as The Fists of Vengeance, the Pirates. You have, what is that one? Don't know that one. Five Shaolin Masters, Blood Money, also known as The Stranger and the Gunfighter. Let's see. But then you have this whole series, like I said, of these five elementals, the five elements. So you have the Five Venoms. This was released in 1982. Okay, I just got to read this. The review noted the Five Element Ninjas lacks the emotional intensity of Chang's earlier films, but stated that its delirious verve and invention more than compensate. The body count is enormous, even by Chang's notoriously gore-drenched standards, though his cartoonishly unrealistic blood spurts and a disemboweled fighter meeting his doom after slipping on his own dangling entrails smacks more of a Monty Python Peckinpah tribute than anything especially disturbing. James Mudge of Beyond Hollywood wrote, has pretty much everything that discerning fans could ever want. I mean, this stuff was so over the top, like absolutely insane. Like literally the guy trips over his own entrails because he had been stabbed across the gut. Who writes that? It's just insane. Yet Imagine being like a kid and watching this. So if this was first released in 1982, let's say I am seeing it either a year or 2 years out. That's like I'm like 10 years old watching some dude be like, eviscerated. Just crazy stuff. Let's see, what other movies are there? Really, that late 70s are the ones that I seem to remember. Oh, how did I even forget about this, though? Not a Shaw Brothers film, but the first I ever saw Jackie Chan, which honestly did not even enter my brain until much later. I'm like, oh my gosh, Drunken Master. Holy cow, I saw that. I saw that on, Kung Fu Theater. I mean, absolutely legendary performer. So his stuff was on there too. But like 1978, you have 36 Chamber of Shaolin. You have the Shaolin Handlock, 5 Deadly Venoms, Invincible Shaolin, Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber, Heroes of the East. In 79, you have Shaolin Rescuers, Deadly Breaking Sword, The Brothers, Shaolin Daredevils, Abbot of Shaolin, which has Pai Mei, Mad Monkey Kung Fu. This is one of the ones that I was looking for. Yes. Esteemed monkey-style kung fu master and opera actor Chen is befuddled in a devious plot designed to exploit his alcoholism and tarnish his otherwise flawless credibility amongst townspeople, where he and his beautiful sister, Miss Chen, perform. I remember this. Absolutely remember this. Because also bear in mind that like there have been multiple themes in Chinese cinema when it comes to talking about Mad Monkey and Monkey Kung Fu, and there's like a whole mythos related to monkey style, and I think that goes to the monkey god, just very much a part of mythology as well. Just really good stuff. I don't know. I've always enjoyed it. There have been modern takes on the genre. I think, what was it called? Kung Fu Hustle. I really enjoyed that movie. I just think it was an homage to that era, and there's something really fun about it. Even when it's meant to have certain moments of like real drama, then all of a sudden someone is flying or someone has some kind of magical power that comes out of nowhere. So if you haven't seen Kung Fu Hustle, let's see, that came out in 2004. I mean, it is right out of that era. How did they write this up here? Let's see. The climate of the film industry and the expectation of 21st century action film were different throughout the history of Chinese cinema. However, the differences provides one of the reasons why Kung Fu Hustle was so well received. Kung Fu Hustle responded to and amplified a global demand for the reawakening of martial arts cinema, and one which was fulfilled by a multitude of reiterations of the genre, all of which can be said without a doubt fulfilled the criteria for 21st century action cinema. High budget, stylish, and action-packed. It's definitely taking all of those elements from these older style martial arts cinema movies, giving them big budgets, giving them strong stories and good production and stunt work. Awesome. It absolutely is awesome. And it says that it began a new wave in Chinese cinema with Stephen Chow and other directors responsible for the creation of another subset of martial arts cinema, which included the vampire genre. Stephen Chow combined elements such as undead, Taoism, Kung Fu, as well as comedy into his movies, which helped create a comedy horror feel that was distinct to Hollywood. Good stuff, man. Just really good stuff. I can't say enough about how much I enjoyed that movie. Like, great. Absolutely great. So check it out if you get a chance. What else has he done? He did Shaolin Soccer. I remember that coming out because it's a comedy. Let's see. The New King of Comedy. It's a remake of Chow's own 1999 film Kingdom Comedy, this time set in mainland China with different characters. Journey of the West, Conquering the Demons. Yeah, I don't know. I like his stuff, but it looks like he's done tons of Chinese television and won a few awards for Kung Fu Hustle, both at home and abroad on international markets. So that's the stuff that was happening on UHF television. So now, the early age of cable. So sometimes you would have a UHF channel that was growing in a particular market. I think one of the examples is there's like Chicago has, I think, a TV station that's become very, very big. And that originally was a UHF channel. Well, I feel like some of the early programming on something like USA Network was taking whatever was working in these different various local markets and deciding to do their own spin on it, which now is going to be broadcast nationally. And I think there's no better example of this than Commander USA's groovy movies. Now, I'm pretty sure I've talked about Commander USA before, particularly when talking about horror movies. But this was started in 1985 and it only ran for 4 years. I could have sworn it was on forever. But it's hosted by Jim Hendricks as Commander USA, soaring superhero, Legion of Decency, retired. A wacky but slightly seedy blue-collar comic book superhero who occasionally displayed powers such as microwave vision, usually prepare a mid-movie meal of fish or eggs. And of course, he had his buddy on his hand, Lefty, which of course be on his right hand. Now, here's what's great about this. So, I guess it's who came first? Oh boy, hold on a second. Who came first? I just remembered another. Okay. So I believe this came a little bit later, right? Hold on. Oh, boy. Okay. So I don't remember Larry Vincent. Don't remember Larry Vincent. Might have been very localized in the LA area, but you had someone named Elvira. So Cassandra Peterson. So Elvira's Movie Macabre, right? So that ran 1981 to 1986. So Elvira came first as far as someone who was going to have horror movies. So she ran for 5 seasons. Interesting. Very interesting. Because I'm looking at... Do you guys remember Dr. Heckle and Mr. Hype? Which was a comedy drama horror romance film by Charles Griffith, starring Oliver Reed and Sonny Johnson. Do you remember this? Holy cow. I have not thought about this movie in 40 plus years or something. Holy cow, that thing was bonkers. Okay, so Elvira's Movie Macabre and Commander USA's groovy movies were basically very, very similar in the fact that they were playing horror movies. So yes, I've talked about the Creature double feature, but you know, these were more, I guess, well, no, I guess it's kind of the same kind of stuff. So some indies, some kind of the legendary ones, and sometimes just absolutely insane movies. Like here's, you know, the first season was Grave of the Vampire, Silent Night, Bloody Night, The House That Screamed, The Fall of the House of Usher, Blackula. Guys, Blackula, do you remember this? Do you remember the blaxploitation films of the 70s? You have The Thing with Two Heads, Cry of the Banshee, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. Remember that one? Horror Hospital, Necromancy, The Brotherhood of Satan, Terror House, The House of Seven Corpses, not to be confused with the later House of 1,000 Corpses by one Mr. Rob Zombie. So, but then like The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a Canadian-American version of the story, right? So then you go back and there's Commander USA's groovy movies and, you know, American Werewolf in London, the Alligator People. You have Friday the 13th, 1, 2, and 3. You have Cat People. You have Chud. Cannibalistic. What is it? Cannibalistic. Oh, why am I drawing a blank? Cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. That's right. That was shown on Commander USA's groovy movies. You have The Day Mars Invaded Earth. You have The Final Terror. Hercules in New York. Holy cow. I remember that. Starring Arnold Schwarzenegger in his acting debut. Oh my gosh. Holy cow. Let's see. House of 1,000 Dolls. I Married a Monster from Outer Space. Let's see. My Bloody Valentine. Little Shop of Horrors. Let's Scare Jessica to Death. I've heard that name. I don't think I've ever seen it. Anyway, so you have all of these shows that were basically aggregators, who are putting together a package. I guess really you could call it almost like an anthology in a way, where you'd have a different strange movie of the week, except within not your, you know, your standard ABC Sunday night movie or whatever it is, Disney Sunday night movie. This was all dedicated to absurdist stuff. So whether it's horror or satirical horror, comedy, the blaxploitations, the classic early black and white horror, really across all different genres, all mixed in. When you take a look at season 5 of Elvira, she also played Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Legend of Lizzie Borden, The Mighty Gorga. They Saved Hitler's Brain. What? Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. That is a classic. Comedy horror film directed by Bob Clark. I have seen that, most likely on here. A sadistic theater director uses a necromantic ritual in an attempt to resurrect the dead in an island cemetery. The attempt backfires as it creates aggressive zombies, which attack the director and his theatrical troupe. I mean, you can't make some of this stuff up. So I loved this stuff as a kid. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I think that's another thing when we talk about things generationally and talk about Gen X and why our sense of humor is the way that it is and why we kind of enjoy the cinema that we do and even some fondness that we have from things from our youth. It's because it's so bizarre. Like, I feel like we were really exposed to a lot of the campy, dark humor at such a young age where I can't imagine, like, our parents at equivalent ages seeing any of this stuff. So I know for me, like, my mom would have been, 10 in like the mid 60s. Right. So, I mean, like 66, 67, somewhere in that range kind of thing. And I can't imagine my grandparents, strict grandparents, ever allowing my mom and my aunts to watch anything like this. And here we are a generation later, and my mom and my dad, they're young, and they're like, oh, okay, creature double feature time. Nice. You know what I mean? I just think that it's not just a matter that, we were left unattended, although that's a common refrain for Gen X. I just also think there was different ideas about what was allowable to some extent. And if it was on broadcast TV, it couldn't be that bad. And that was just going to show how more realistic forms of violence were becoming much more prevalent. So there's this desensitization factor, I think, that was going on. So anything that was gory in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s that would be played on some of these wouldn't necessarily be scary by even the standards of that day, as they were moving into more sophisticated practical effects as well as digital and early special effects, CGI type effects, even though a lot of times it was just miniatures and those kind of things. Anyway, all this started because all of these rave reviews about Godzilla -1, and I said, I'm probably going to watch it, and I'm probably going to watch it with its original dub, and I'm probably going to go and watch some of these kung fu movies. And I don't know, I keep replaying these scenes in my mind, and I just kind of want to find, there's this one movie in particular, and I just can't find it. And I have to see it. It was so gory. Dude just kept getting sliced up by what I think is Pai Mei, or a character very similar to Pai Mei, and I can't find it. Which also, just very quickly, going back to Kill Bill, which is why you had some absurdist blood spurting special effects in that movie. It was because these movies were meaning to be over the top. Oh, you slice it. Monty Python, that's why they use that as an example, right? It's just a flesh wound. Like, that whole thing was not played for camp necessarily in some of these Chinese films, but it was also meant to be shocking. Like, what would happen if you slice someone's arm off? Would it shoot out like that? Probably not, but it probably wouldn't be pretty either. Just fun stuff. So anyway, that's a little walk down memory lane for the Creature double feature, the Kung Fu or Martial Arts Theater, Commander USA's Groovy Movies, and Elvira and her, what is it? Elvira's Movie Macabre. I know, macabre, whatever you want to say. All really good stuff. And yeah, I kind of had a crush on Elvira a little bit for like a minute there. Yeah. Anyway, let me know. What do you think of the episode? Do you remember some of these things? What were some of your favorites? I'd love to know. How do you let me know? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Please like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.